Laura Kelly. Absent. Gary Nelson.
Here.
Tommy Smith. And Brenda Tucker. Awesome. Item 2, review and approval of minutes from December 13th, 2022 meeting. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those? And so, do I have a motion to approve?
Make a motion.
Right, Gary, thank you. And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Good. All right, Tommy second. And all those in favor vote aye. Aye. All opposed? And those pass unanimously. All right, on to new business. Number 1, or A, is the election of chairperson and vice chairperson for 2023.
We leave it the same. So you want to second? I'll second that.
All right, the motion is put forward to keep chairperson and vice chairperson the same. And we have the motion in the second, so shall we vote on that? All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? And that motion passes. So we will have myself as chairperson and Gary as vice chairperson for the 2023 year. All right. We're ready for our workshop on the transportation corridor planning, comprehensive plan, text and zoning ordinance and text amendments. Or if you need a minute or two, Jeff, do you have anything else?
No.
All right.
All right, just go ahead and have discussions, we've done some work, so.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, there.
Sorry about PowerPoint.
Oh.
Like,
Of course.
The agenda tonight, go over the public outreach update, review the goals that we've been working on with the group, the draft future land use map, and then discuss the zoning compatibility matrix and design overlay standards for the overlay zone. So, public outreach update, we have 88 survey results now. The crowdsourced map still has some limited participation, but we've seen that in a lot of places, especially more rural areas where there aren't as many spaces that people congregate, not so much shared use. So it's not uncommon, but the survey numbers are getting up there. That's exciting. And we've taken that into account for the goals that we've started to draft. We also use some qualitative analysis software to go over the past goals. So I was reading through them and I tried to make a spreadsheet for us all to work in, but I looked like a crazy person, like making notes and then splitting the cells into more cells with more notes. So instead of doing that, I tried to make some visuals for you guys for tonight. If we can't bring them up on the screen, I can send them out to everyone. But right now, I'm just going to show you some of the general idea of it. This is so the previous plan was broken down into, I think it was 5 different land uses. There was general land use, agricultural, residential, industrial, and commercial. So we did an analysis of all of those combined. So we have some visuals on what the most common words were, is what this visual is. The software that we used also draws out themes and then gives you subcategories of themes. So we did that for each of the separate land use categories to see what those categories had in common, what we wanted to focus on.
Yes.
We as a group discussed in the last workshop that we did not want to have all those separate land use chapters, that we wanted land use and then have those separate categories within that. So we looked at what the common themes are in each of those separate chapters that we can combine into the new plan.
If you join the Zoom meeting, you probably can share your screen, you can't have PowerPoint to come up. That might work, right?
Yeah, that should work.
Okay, so this is what the word clouds look like that we've looked at for some of the chapters. And we just have the land use and transportation for tonight, the rest of it's kind of broad, so we're gonna put it in that Google Drive that we discussed and have everyone look at those goals individually for the remaining elements. But that was this is all of the land uses combined. This is what the themes look like. Well, the software doesn't give us the most legible, presentable breakdown, but we can see that under land, the top things were avoiding land use complex and agricultural uses. And then agricultural uses was a theme that came up throughout all of them, so that'll be the primary factor, if that's something we're still interested in, making a primary factor for land uses. For agricultural land use themes, it was prime farmland and preservation of the current land uses. For commercial land use, I actually thought that this was our transportation analysis for a second, because it's roads, major transportation, and major transportation networks. So from what we've been discussing, I think that aligns with the future of this next plan. As far as having a commercial land use primarily along those nodes that we've discussed and transportation corridors. Industrial land use themes, water trunk lines, industrial uses, industrial sites, big factors, transmission lines. The residential land uses, we got a lot of different themes, but again, one of the top ones is agricultural uses and uninterrupted use. So, taking all of these into account, we developed a few of the goals that we'd like to present and some of the strategies that can go with that, and then wanted to work on the strategies and action items as a group. For transportation themes, this was our word cloud that came out of that analysis, and been a little bit more of a robust themes as far as the amount of times that different issues were discussed throughout that chapter in the previous plan. So traffic, road development, road improvements, increasing traffic load, anticipated future traffic loads, all things that we've been discussing and we'll take into account in this revision of the plan. Well, I was gonna bring up the Excel sheet. So this is not what this will look like in the final plan, but we like to have kind of a workspace for our goals and action items and strategies that we can comment on, we can edit it, and then we'll put it into that final format that's printable and looks nice. But some of the transportation goals from those analyses and previous plan, provide a safe, efficient, multimodal transportation network for all residents, maintain a county transportation system that enables access for various needs, including agricultural, commercial, and emergency vehicles. Manage access and design of the transportation network in order to effectively maintain the safe and functional integrity of roads and bridges in the county's jurisdiction. So far, do these kind of align with what you were mentioning for the transportation plan?
So these goals are the 30,000 foot view, like top, okay, and then we'll build down from here. You know, these are in 20 years, you want to be able to say, yep, the actions that we took, no matter what they end up being, whether they're decided, you know, in the next year or whether a reiteration of this, you know, happens in another few years, or you change the action items, that kind of thing. In the end, goal one is that we strive to provide a safe and efficient and multimodal transportation system. We maintain the county transportation system so that it, effectively, service agricultural, commercial, and emergency traffic as needed. They're the big overarching picture, and then the more specifics are those objectives, strategies, whatever we end up wanting to call those. And again, as Sarah's kind of walked through, if I'm catching this correctly, these are new transportation goals developed from your current comprehensive plans language and the feedback that we've received so far, and kind of building those together and say, okay, we're going to, update the comprehensive plan to include this focus on transportation and these transportation corridors, but we need to come up with some goals for those. Am I following correctly? Sweet, okay. I liked all your boxes, I just got lost there for a second, so I was.
Thank you. Yeah,
I was like, oh, that's a really cool analysis, I'm gonna wanna look at that later.
Yeah.
But, basically.
That's a lot of info.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it all came to this, in that we need to come up with this new section to update the comprehensive plan that focuses on transportation corridors. And here's the goals that we're looking to discuss and then build from here.
Can I ask Sarah, what was the number of the responses? Can you, in your word cloud there, the number one issues of all the responses that you've received?
So I haven't actually uploaded the survey responses to
Okay.
the software, but that's a really good idea, and I will do that.
Okay, I'm just curious as to, we sit and we talk and,
Yeah.
in our board meetings. I'm just curious as to what the public had to say, what was their number one issues, and make sure that we're, I guess for me, it's helpful to know what they're saying, to make sure we get that organized into, comprehensive plan.
I have the Webster County survey up here. So if we wanted to take a look at an overview of the results, we can.
Yeah, today I was just gonna do that.
I guess I was just wondering if there was a theme.
Top 3 reasons you want to live, work, and relax in Webster County: family, community, opportunities.
So is the size of the word kind of means there's more attention?
This is how many times it
Yeah.
Yeah,
popped up, how many people threw
that's,
family in their response.
okay, that's how I was reading your word cloud. Was
Yeah,
like-
that same sort of thing, and that word cloud, I misspoke. That is from the existing comprehensive plan, that this is where it's. We included that in this analysis because we want to build on that plan to develop this new transportation corridor piece that is going to be in addition to that plan. So without having to completely, throw the baby out with the bathwater, use what's there, bring in some of this feedback that we've gotten, and develop these new goals for that transportation corridors piece.
What's the word that's right next to here? I'm like, leaning like here.
The yellow one,
Yeah, that one right there. It's in yellow.
right,
Oh, trails here.
So good now, what are some strengths and opportunities for increasing mobility? Check out and see if some of those have some word clouds as well. Like, so Margot, you would ask, what is the concern? What is the top concern that people have?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know, is what, if there were, what the top concerns were. I mean, the fact that people were responding to the surveys is good, means that they have obviously opinions and concerns.
Yeah.
And that's, what I kind of wanted to see.
so if we look at this, let's see if it's still legible if I carry on my search of it.
Those are the strengths that people say. maintain. Yeah, throw out a couple of those words,
Well maintained.
well maintained. Yep. Sidewalks is an interesting one. You guys do a lot of sidewalk work?
Not the county.
Right, that's. There's no sidewalk to my farm. No kidding.
They're talking about trails.
No, well, people sometimes when they take these surveys, the cities within the county also get some.
So the PowerPoint, the one that has transportation vertically, that's the result from the previous plan. And the other one, the brighter green, brighter colors, that is the result from the survey responses so far. So it kind of looks like some of the responses match access.
Traffic, efficient, circulation, those are all maintained, safe, paved, gravel, accesses in there. Entries can go to, if I drive, I'm gonna drive.
I might be showing my age here, but I'm just not a word cloud person. It's
It's
like information all over the place, and it's really hard to look at that, and other than size and color, to determine what people felt was important. Now, granted, in our previous comprehensive plan, there weren't a lot of responses, so it was pretty easy. We didn't have a lot of feedback, and just a basic bar graph was all we needed. But that's, I guess that just would be me being old. I think it's a good visual for in plan.
Right,
It's
as
one of-
far as data though, it's not a good expression of like scientific data.
Yeah, it's hard to decipher. I mean, and I'm sitting here I'm looking at words, just words.
Yeah.
There's the word, easy, stop, focus, safe. They're just like random words.
There is, because people put them in a sentence, that's the problem, the issue, you could read them line by line and try to piece them to get some stuff together. In general, the word cloud just gives us an idea of where to start looking for those themes, which is kind of what Sarah did before. But yeah, these by themselves, like planting is great, what do people say? So I might have to dig into the comments a little bit that are actually, because if you look at, the responses here, let's say, so, response to the question of, what else would you like to have considered in Webster County Transportation Corridor Plan? We had 2 counts of yes, so, who knows, but, yes, no adult type of place. Yes, native plantings would be good. Worry less about board docks. We need to have our community entrance in Main Street. So you really have to read through trails connecting communities. This may increase the aesthetic of the area, but keep into account the large number of wildlife. So you have to pull some themes out of all of that, but the word cloud, it helps us at least at this level of summary type thing, kind of look and be like, oh, okay, I wouldn't know, like, native plantings obviously got mentioned enough times within the folks that answered the survey that it blew up that big, So it's kind of interesting that people want to see, which in general in Iowa, you've seen, I don't know if you probably have all been driving these roads as long as I have. There's a lot more, at least on the DOT controlled like ditches, there's a lot more vegetation. They leave it a lot longer, they don't mow it as much, there's not as, it's way different than when I was young and remember, just looking at mowed grass as I drove everywhere. I would say on Interstate 35, all the plantings that they do to keep basically trying to keep the snow drifts and the ice drifts down, like that type of stuff. Yeah, so I mean, people obviously are taking what that kind of stuff and want to see it elsewhere, is kind of what I would at least envision from that, or at least ask the leading question when we have another public type of thing, be like, well, native plantings were mentioned a lot earlier in this process. Is that something people want to see on the roads, on the county roads? Do they want to see more of that or less, or, is it a problem, whatever it is? I was getting to your other question. About the top concerns.
The navigations that you don't have to scroll through results.
Okay, so challenges to mobility. And that's moving on to strengths, opportunities,
So I think at this level, so the website that we use is our GIS Survey 123.
Yeah.
At this level of analysis, it just gives us the raw data. And then it gives us the word count, so it turns into the nice little cloud for us. So until we actually go through and analyze that data, we won't really have the specific results.
I guess for myself, just in dealing with the public, what you just read off, the responses, the actual responses, to me are more meaningful and they're easier for me to draw conclusions from.
Okay.
Just because you could say, hey, here people are actually concerned about these things. You know, and then the question is how much? Not everybody is, one person that gave that response, you know, it's something that they're concerned about. And that somebody took the time to fill out the survey because they were concerned about it. But if is it one person, is it 7 people, was it 30 people?
Right.
You know, that type of thing.
We'll include that.
Okay.
We'll include that as we continue to develop the goals and strategies. We'll also include that as an appendix in the plan. We'll have the raw survey results and then a brief analysis of the raw data.
One of the other things we can do is share these results with you guys too. Like just you guys could sort through some of this if you wanted to as well, just because it is interesting.
I mean, maybe each question, you have the top 2 answers.
Okay.
I'm just, I mean,
A summary kind of
just,
thing.
yeah, the top 2 concerns or top 2, I'm just.
In my head,
Top
I'm
2 or
hearing,
3,
yeah,
'cause I
I'm
mean,
hearing back to the original comprehensive plan, and you got down to where you had individual, you know, they're listed in the other comp, in our current comp plan, they're actually listed some of the things that people commented on, and it's like one response.
Oh, sure.
And you know, it's only one response, but for me, it was hey, here's something that somebody's concerned about, and it might have been something that I didn't give any thought to, but somebody else apparently did.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess for me, that kind of data is, if for nothing else, if you know, somebody comes up to you in the street and says, hey, you know, what happened to my survey results and everything, I can say, oh yeah, let's try to remember you, and, you know, sure, we're talking about those things, that was a good issue.
Yeah.
That's why that kind of stuff is important to me, I don't know how else.
We'll do a little of both. We'll summarize the themes, but then we always put the full survey results in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And we put them in the appendix, and so that if anybody ever did come up and be like, hey, be like, yep, all the survey results are in the appendix. We summarized them in, you know, I think we do it in the public engagement chapter, where we just say, here's what we generally heard on this question. Same thing with the stakeholder interviews that Sarah had done. We don't say so-and-so said this, we say, we asked this question to all of the stakeholder participants, and here's the themes that came out of it. So we do both to cover both those bases, because I agree with you. People don't want to invest the time in taking the survey, and then even if they had a crazy wackadoodle answer, they want to know that
It's still
somebody
the
listened.
It's still an answer, it's still a
Yep.
concern, you're still a citizen of Webster
Yep.
County or surrounding area.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be interesting too to see the results from the, you know, the general public versus the stakeholders.
Sure.
You know, what are our stakeholders concerned about? Are they the same concerns
As the
as
general public. Where those overlap, and
Yeah.
where some of the things that stakeholders were worried about, but the public's like, hey, what about this?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Okay.
Sorry, I do.
Okay, well, so we started with I don't want to take the point, we started with the transportation goals. I'll jump to the land use, and then I'll upload this, since we've taken a little bit of a look at the outline for it and the strategy. So on this top transportation goal, I added a strategy and 2 of the action items as kind of an example of something that we might develop. So all of these, this is where the shared folder comes in, to a Google spreadsheet. And then if you all want to leave your comments and ideas for some of the strategies and action items, then I'll refine those. And we'll get the draft of that implementation matrix out from there. But those are some of the transportation for land use. Again, we use the analysis of the previous plan and kind of boil those down into, currently have 6 goals. Less of space here, we want to add more. And then from there, we'll do the strategies and action items. These ones include coordinate the Webster County Land Use Plan and Webster County zoning ordinance to optimize utilization of land use and future growth. That one was a recurring theme in the land use sections, and it came almost directly from one of the previous goals, but I think it's something that's kind of ongoing for the county. So, included that, facilitate transitional growth between urban and rural areas, encourage development that optimizes efficient extension of utilities and enhances and preserves natural features, adopt environmental conditions, regulations to accommodate development, soil types, watersheds, air pollution, and other environmental factors that may be impacted by development. That one was a combination. So we did use the analysis software to do, we did each of the chapters. So we can see some of those. I won't get too into it because it's pretty boring, but we can see those references and connections throughout the previous plan of the various elements. So definitely wanted to include that environmental aspect of land use.
One of the issues we're working to make better from the previous plan is this implementation piece and the goals. So the previous plan talked about implementation, but then didn't have a lot of actual steps, those types of things, and it had some goals, but they weren't uniform in where they were at and kind of how they were laid out. All fine at the time, but if we're gonna make it better by doing an update, which we're in the middle of, we wanted to make sure that we did that. The way that you will be able to use this going forward is the action items. It's not going to be overwhelmingly, it won't be overwhelming. That's just the best way to say it. In that the action items can be changed on an annual basis. If you guys knock off this action item, like put a new one in next year, like review those on an annual basis. So the
Action items should be though, shouldn't they?
Yes.
Should they?
Right, because it should be like
As you take that action, you should change that.
right, but the strategies and the goals don't change. So the way it's laid out is you have this goal, and then you have some strategies, and then each one of those strategies has a couple action items. So it's not overwhelming that you're like, oh my gosh, we have 17 goals, but no action items. Or we have, 1 goal and 20 objectives and no action items. Or we have 4 objectives and, and a bunch of action items, and we're not sure which goal. Like, this will be it's all taken from your existing plan. So in that sense, it is an update, but it'll be a very good transition from here's the goal, here are 2 strategies that deal directly with that goal, here are 4 action items that you review annually. Now, maybe it's an action item that, yep, we're still doing that. Sounds good. This is an annual thing. And maybe it's one that you're like, we did that last year. What else can we do to help achieve this objective? And just change that. So just like you update a future land use map, based on if somebody comes in with a rezoning and it doesn't exactly fit whatever color was on there, put together 10 years ago, you say, okay, well, we can amend that map. That's fine. You amend this on an annual basis too. But it keeps it structured so that it's still supporting those goals that we agreed on and that are, go through this public process. But the action items, the county can change annually as they get them done.
Or at least with the action plans and too, what I like about that is it keeps them fresh and it keeps them in front of you as a reminder, like, okay, we need to be working on this and we need to accomplish this. Even if it is something that's annually, maybe you do it annually, maybe you do it biannually, it's always there because I've been on too many committees where the action plans kind of get forgotten and they're not putting there in front of you. It's good to have those action plans.
Especially since it's a county-wide plan, because some of them will be Some of them will be things that only you guys take care of. You know, when we get a rezoning request, we're gonna look at this, and this based on the transportation corridor piece and our future land use plan. But on the other hand, if it's something related to housing or public health or environment, it might be a board of supervisors thing where they say, look, we got a budget for that 2 years from now, because we know that that's important. We wanna, you know, bite that off, but we have to budget for it. And that's where the action plan can slip well with the capital improvement process that, you know, the county goes through on that annual basis as well.
You'll essentially have a checklist. Well, once we get this worksheet version of this finished, we'll prioritize and do a timeline for each of the action items. So those 1 to 3 year action items that are top priority, those are what you want to look at first. And some of these, so for example, the top action item, we have support connectivity efforts of trail sidewalks and other active transportation methods. That'll probably be an ongoing action item and something that you might address if there's a specific project the first year, but it'll be a continuous one. It's probably not one that you'll stop considering the connectivity, excuse me. But then for like the strategy where appropriate designate weight restrictions, you might have an action item that says review current weight restrictions and analyze compared to the current traffic routes, something like that. If that's done that year, then you check it off. And then you can reprioritize your action items for that strategy and then kind of continue that process.
Sounds like a whole lot more work for the planning and zoning administrator.
Well, yeah, so they put this together, they give it to us so that I can give to them before the meeting and they can start analyzing it.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
Next time we have permits,
So we'll upload these ones to the Google Drive and I'll send that back out. Everyone will have a link.
I'm gonna put it in your packet.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can review the current goals and strategies. We'll keep adding to it. We'll workshop some action items based on the recommendations from you all. And then when we have the final worksheet of the goals and strategies and action items, we'll set that out for review.
I mean, I like the structure, like Vern says, it kind of gives you that reminder of, hey, you gotta do this. And I'm thinking back a couple of zoning administrators where every year we're supposed to, at the beginning of the year, you know, review on this plan. Well, where to start?
Sure.
And this kind of gives you a place to start, because it kind of gives you, here's the specifics, you know, are we still doing this? How are we doing on this? You know, yeah, so before it seemed like it was just so
You
vague.
could literally look just at that action item column and be like, yep, still
check,
doing,
check.
no,
Yeah.
replace, yep, no.
And especially like you said, when you're talking about budgeted projects that need to be, you know, figured out years in advance because of budgeting.
Yep.
That's a good way to keep that in mind. Like you said, sometimes you just lose some of those items.
Yeah, they get totally forgotten about. It's a nice little quick reminder.
Yeah.
Got it. We need to do it annually.
And
Well-
once we get this finished and the plan is done, I'll relinquish that spreadsheet to you all, so someone else can take control of it. And then you can utilize the spreadsheet to help you go through that process.
Kind of be a living, updatable document.
So that's where we're at with goals and strategies. I'll get these uploaded and sent out. And I will let Chris talk about it.
Okay, so I brought a few maps. The one, if you would you, while I'm chatting here, would you bring up zoning map? Turn it off.
Oh, that's not zoning.
No, yeah, no, it's zoning. So the last time we talked about mapping, and you guys can, you can't see the screen, and I apologize if I make everybody turn around, but I'm going to, sorry. Let me just check. Okay, so these green boxes will correspond, so if you remember we put out that flyer, we talked, this has been probably early last fall. We said, okay, here's our general areas that we're talking about, and we want to, our corridors. Those are the green boxes on this existing land use map. And the existing land use map is basically taken from the assessor. So what we did was we looked at the assessor's data. They don't exactly classify land use, but they do classify taxation, or how they're assessing things. So basically, we went through and, You know, the yellow, a lot of it might, especially in the rural areas, we counted it as residential, that's the homesteads for the most part. You know, some of it might be agricultural, but it's all within that area. There's obviously some, you know, commercial areas out there, some industrial areas, but again, just existing land use, and then with these areas added that we talked about the other day. So that's one of the things that we will then transfer into a new future land use map. And what I want to discuss, so one of the things we talked about earlier in the process is what did Fort Dodge do? So I did print off a copy of their future land use map, which some of it overlaps with what you guys had, especially kind of in that north, and we talked about this in the northeast and kind of the southeast side, and then they have some different stuff going on to the northwest and kind of north along 169. One of my first questions is, knowing that they've done this planning, are there specific pieces of that Fort Dodge plan that you guys are like, that's crazy? No, we would not, you know, no, that would not be something that we would want to happen. The alternative, or an alternative, would be that we try to incorporate what they've already done into that portion of a future land use map and just refer to theirs and say, within this area, the city has a plan that generally looks like this, and then we just reference theirs. Almost like you would do, so in this map, in that, obviously in the incorporated area, the part that's incorporated within the city, you guys don't have future land use there, obviously, because that's not in, it's in the county, but it's under city jurisdiction. There would be, for those growth areas, do we want, for the growth areas, so the areas outside the current city limits, which kind of are shown on this map, but they show some type of future land use within their planning area, which would be the colored area of that map. How do you want to handle that in your future land use map?
Who has like final decision, final say on that? Is it the city?
It is whoever the property is under the jurisdiction of. So if it's not annexed, the county still has, on rezoning, has the final say. Now, on subdivisions, the city has some say in whether a subdivision, you know, like, if somebody wanted to put in a rural subdivision, you know, I don't know, out here somewhere, the county would contact the city and say, hey, somebody's put in a subdivision, they want to put a subdivision in here, and the city would review it. Now, the city may say, we're not interested in reviewing that, or they may say, hey, this is within our growth area, we're gonna have a hard time servicing this. We wouldn't approve this as it is for whatever reason. But in the end, for the most part, it is whoever has it. So if it's annexed in the city, the county is not gonna be able to have much determination. If it's on that fringe area, the city has some say on what the county does, especially when it comes to the division of land. Not so much zoning, but division, right? You guys are up.
Yeah, it's more land utilities.
Sure, yep, yeah, which is, yeah, based off of that. So I mean, my initial thought is we try to, if this map is their approved map, that we try to, unless there are major things where you're like, oh, absolutely, that's crazy, why would they want to do that there? That we try to incorporate their map into this map as best we can.
Do you see anything major right off the bat?
Well, I know we talked about the last time, so you guys had kind of urban residential in some of these areas, and I think because theirs is a little newer than yours, that they've done some more dive in on those specific areas and how those might function as an extension of urban growth, which is most likely to happen. So there's nothing that leaps out at me right off the bat that says, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're planning on doing that. But I figured we put it in, my thought is put it into this map, show them side by side, because this one exists as it is right now. We can show, okay, here's here's your draft future land use map that incorporates what Fort Dodge has planned. And we can, we haven't seen much from the other cities in terms of growth outside their limits, but we did have some input there, and we will continue to look for that. If they had the same kind of thing, like if, I don't know, if Moreland said, oh, we're planning a big development east of the city on Highway 20, because we know we can provide services to it. We would put that on that future land use map as well, to say, the city has said that they want to expand into this area. That's the other option, is not get too particular, and just whatever Fort Dodge has planned, we just put in urban growth, and show it as, the best way to say it. So here, this is gonna be really simplistic, right? This is city, and this is county. Now, if we look at a city plan and they have a bunch of, let's say, we're gonna grow residential here, right? That's hard to see, I'm sorry. Orange, all of this, the city says we're gonna have that as residential. In the county map, you just see that. And maybe this is existing city limits, and the county just shows that as, urban growth area. We don't necessarily want to put exactly what the city has it's gonna be, but all we know is the city said, that's in our planned growth area, here's where we want it to be, and we just put it as urban growth area. It's an option without getting too into the weeds about exactly, what the city's gonna be doing in that area and that kind of thing, because in general, if they annex it, it's this type of box anyway. If it's annexed, the county isn't gonna have a say on what goes in there, provided it's not detrimental. You know what I mean? Like, if they wanna put houses, or they wanna put stores, or they wanna put a trailer park, like, if it's in the city, it's within their jurisdiction at that point.
An urban growth area could include some commercial, light commercial, those kinds of things.
Yeah, it would just, it would be a mapping wise, it's a catch-all to say that is city. That is urban growth, that will be, when it grows, it will be annexed into the city, because the county understands it's part of Fort Dodge's future growth plans, but we are not making plans for the growth in that area at this point.
I guess I'm thinking of it from our perspective, from a zoning perspective, somebody reading urban growth, planned urban growth.
Yep.
What does that mean? And I see the situation that we just had with travel center. What's our definitions, what's not, I'm just throwing that out there to see what anybody else's comments are.
You just gotta need a clear definition of what that means, but yeah.
That's
Like what he's saying, it's a catch-all, it could be anything, correct?
If it's annexed into the city, and that's the clear distinct, that's where the plan has to clearly lay out. If this is annexed into if this area has been notified, and it really at this point is only applying to Fort Dodge, because they're the only city that's really done some planning that would incorporate areas outside their existing city limits.
So any rezoning land use change by our code, if it's within 2 miles of any jurisdictional boundary, we have to notify that city, whether it be local, Moreland, or Dodge, or whatever. So, so it kind of makes sense to leave that 2 miles outside these cities. But
Especially if if it's in their growth area, like there's areas of Fort Dodge like 2 miles this way that, I would leave your current future land use map as it is, that's quarry, like, that's what they have.
that's most likely to change.
Yeah.
I mean,
so here's the thing, we'll develop 2 alternatives. We'll do one where we fill it all in, and one where we don't. Now, I wanna go back to your question about when somebody comes in that area, what if it's not in the city, right? Like, what do we do? We're not changing the zoning map at this point. We're just changing the future land use, but if they asked for, and I'll have to think about this a little bit, because we can talk about it in the description of the county assumed that when that land was improved, it would be annexed, but until then, I would say in those areas, it's left as, whatever it currently is, probably ag. And the reason would be is that the city has indicated that that's an area where they want to grow. So we don't necessarily want to totally support the intensification of the use until it's annexed. But that's kind of, I don't know what your relationship, that depends a little bit on your relationship with Fort Dodge, I guess, in that sense, is are you guys willing to say, that's not an area that we want to see a lot of growth because we know that the city is looking to grow in that area, or you're like, hey, more growth in Marion, or whatever.
I'm not that concerned. I guess my concern isn't so much the city of Fort Dodge versus us, because I don't like to look at us that way. I don't think that's our relationship. I'm looking at lump that was in our comprehensive plan, and I'm looking at how that was used to make zoning changes.
Okay.
And that's my question. When
You want to avoid that, yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
planning on using the clump thing at all. I don't.
No, we're gonna take
I don't
it.
like the prioritization. I think it's good for you guys to have a plan, and in that sense of doing this type of a thing, you could say to that property owner, we'll be happy to review that zoning request if you are not intending to annex into the city as they've identified this as a growth area. You may have to also look at a future land use amendment with the county for that to amend the future land use map. And that discussion could happen at that time. I think those incidences will probably be, I think people are either gonna wanna be left alone within those growth areas, right, adjacent to a city, or they're gonna wanna annex so that they can take advantage of those utilities, one way or the other.
Like what Tyler said, having it a little more specific and having it, I just don't want to, and I'm mainly thinking of, down on 420 and the areas around there, and then coming up 169. I just feel like slapping that 2 mile, because the 2 mile is from the Fort Dodge city limits where they're gonna come out, where they can comment on, to just take that all the way around and say, okay, we're gonna slap it into that. I don't know if I'd like to see that on the map.
Okay.
Whether it happens or not, I don't know. I don't know if I'd like to see that on the map for an attorney to get and say, hey, to my client, I think we can do this, let's just get something rezoned, because that's exactly what happened.
Well, we've had quite a few rezoning requests. I'm not gonna be exactly sure if they're within that 2 miles, but all right around the outside of Fort Dodge city limits. And a lot more recent years to just to south of Fort Dodge there.
What are a majority of those requests? Are they to do, go from ag to residential, to do like I would call them rural residential subdivisions?
Not really subdivisions, but they're kind of turning into subdivisions.
They're doing lots to put houses on and split a lot here, do a minor subdivision, do another minor subdivision, do another one.
More on just residential lots.
Okay. To build
Or
houses.
just, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I guess that would be,
So I mean, that to me, then going forward, yeah, I can see where city's gonna annex those in, but whether or not they want to be annexed in, is another story, so.
those folks probably don't. I mean, I put myself in their shoes on, I wanna be right next to the city and have my 5 acres, but I don't wanna be in the city. Like, I don't wanna
They
do
don't
it.
wanna follow the city.
The question is, where does the city fall on some of that stuff with it when it's within the 2 mile boundary? Have they put up a fight at all, or they're just like, whatever?
I haven't experienced anything, but they're gonna take it at water and sewer, right? I think if it's a mile away, I don't think the city's really gonna comment too much.
At this point, they're,
They're more about hooking up, and making sure that, there's that facilities there.
And now with rural water, it's out there with disease, I don't know how close Xenia and any of those come up to. So many where they don't have to, they don't really worry so much about water use.
because they have that rural water, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's also all types of issues between cities and rural water and growth as well. Like there are areas you can't grow because the city knows they won't be able to provide water, or they have to buy out Xenia, you know, whatever, and so that causes a lot of issues as well. I think maybe in the sense of that discussion, then it might be worthwhile to, at this stage, for our draft, for our next kind of review of this, for me to take Fort Dodge's map and incorporate it into the future land use map and see what that looks like. And then we can, if we don't agree with some of those things as a group, we can modify them back to whatever the county's ideal would be, but that.
I think that would be interesting to see, and then the other thing to take into consideration is sit here and look at it on the map versus map is one thing, but when you get into the topographical, the actual features of the ground, there are some areas where we know certain things just aren't gonna happen.
Right.
So, you know, do we leave that in an ag situation or not? You know, I don't think we've had, in my tenure on the board, I can't think of any issues with the city of Fort Dodge.
Good.
That we've had even with past zoning administrators.
That's good to know. I wasn't trying to drum anything up. I was just
No,
trying to
and
get
that's
some-
like I said, we need to work together. It's not a,
I think we just leave the city as is and then be planning accordingly, and we're gonna change some land uses around there.
I think that there are maybe, you know, 3 areas that I think of, and they're part of what we're doing here with this transportation corridor. I mean, it's, you know, 169, you know, going north out of Fort Dodge in that area, 169-7 intersection.
Yeah.
And then when you get going to the east of Fort Dodge, like Gary said, all the growth that's coming out there on the east side of Fort Dodge.
So these kind of generally,
Yeah,
I drew
those-
big boxes, but 1, 2, 3 are all areas that we said, like, we know these are growth areas for the county or the city or somebody, but they're likely to continue growing. Those are, yeah, so Fort Dodge, they pretty well correspond with what you guys had, on area 3. Area 2 was one of the ones where I think your future land use plan, I got my the right ones, had it as industrial district, which they have as heavy and light industrial. So 2 pretty well corresponds. Yours had a bunch of residential in 1 and they have like 0 growth. That's the big differences in that area 1 where they, you know, your existing future land use map said that's prime growth area. The question is, I don't know how many of you were here on that discussion. At that time, was that discussion, well, Fort Dodge would probably grow that direction, so we want to put that as residential, or was it a discussion of the county would like to see additional residential growth in that area, even if the city doesn't?
Knowing that there's gonna be possible residential growth, I think we want to leave it as agriculture, that restricts that density, so they can't build there yet, so that
Till it comes into the city.
it comes in.
Yeah.
So, you know, make it restricted as possible, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So match more what Fort Dodge has there than what currently is.
It's a good discussion on that area.
Yeah.
We want to, you know, I mean, everybody's on board.
I think that's an area that's changed for the city too. I think, you know, over the last 20 years, I think that when you look at the town and with the river and everything, there really are a few places that the town can expand.
Yep.
And I think maybe they've seen some changes in their thought processes. Where can we go? How can we, you know, expand this out? And, you know, yeah, the other areas are going to the northeast and then the southeast part.
We'll go with that. I just wanted to have a good general discussion, is exactly what I was looking for.
This area, yeah, we're a little bit concerned about this is all metal extraction. As you go down through here, to your highway 20 and 169.
Yep.
See this area here, whether or not we can reduce this a little bit, because.
Based on that.
Yeah, we're gonna concern with this area,
I'm gonna put some asterisks.
yeah, let me see that. And then, you know, it's the same thing that's going on here, you know, these are.
Right there, right? Okay.
Is that an area, Jeff, where you thought maybe we could reduce or cut back when we were talking about the setback areas for any types of growth.
Land use, or we're talking about?
Well, coming down 169 there.
Yeah.
Or
that's
169 and 420. We did have quite an area there.
Yeah, especially in the area, and this is all agricultural. So,
That's all agricultural, yeah.
agricultural land use.
Yep.
Yeah, the county. It is, yeah.
And then for the industrial, is that?
Oh, yeah, the right hand side, yeah, on the east side, yeah. Okay, we have that node. Commercial, we'll keep that, yeah.
Okay. Now, the other quick item of discussion is within, so we talked about these kind of overlay zones that we came up with. And the reason we wanted to, the reason I think we're leaning more at this point, if I can summarize it, towards an overlay zone as opposed to a different land use classification, is that the compatibility between your future land use map districts as it is and your zoning districts as they are works pretty well. We just want within those specific areas to have some different design guidelines that allow, that encourage a higher level of development because it is close to a corridor that is going to be very visible. And that might offer some bonuses to people as well. You know, like they, like you said, the setback may be reduced if they're willing to, you know, build a nicer building, that kind of thing. But that in general, use-wise, it would still conform with your zoning ordinance as it is. That's where I'm leaning at this point. So when Sarah, so basically you have this, I'll draw that. So let's take. Using that example, I suppose. Let's take any road, right? So here is our overlay zone. And this is the not overlay zone. And you have a person who's like, well, I want to do a commercial building, but I really want to be closer to the interstate or to Highway 20, right? So I'd like to build up here as opposed to up here. And that's fine, whatever they're doing, maybe it's, let's say, industrial condos, which is, you know, where you can use them as an office, you can park your truck in them, you know, they're fairly popular, we see them all over the place. And if you do it up here, you know, the setback is so much, and we won't have any building regulations, that kind of thing, but then the overlay zone, maybe you can build it closer, but you're gonna have a much nicer, you know, it'll have to be a nicer looking building. Is that direction you guys wanted to go with something, or are you more along the lines of, we only want to allow that type of thing here and be able to say no to it outside of those overlay zones?
I don't think you want to turn somebody down to, you know, build up, make something nice.
Right. That's kind of where I thought we would be going, and that's why I was thinking within those overlay zones, we just come up with some, hey, this is a high, you know, this is a high profile quarter for the county, but we're gonna have to, I think we are gonna have to offer them some, and I don't, the county's probably not gonna be like, oh yeah, we'll pay you to develop within that zone. I'm not going that route, but I am saying like, give them some density bonuses, like, you know, like within this overlay zone, if you wanna do that, well, yeah, you can build a little more dense development if it looks nice, that type of thing. Float that at this, obviously I'm not saying, oh yeah, we have to approve that now. I'm just generally thinking, as I start to develop these and put together the guidelines that are gonna match up with, you know, what Sarah's doing, is that something that you guys are okay with? Because otherwise I don't know how to make them do the development better without handing out money. And I don't want to hand out money because I don't think that it's necessary, but if you give some other bonuses, they may be willing to do that.
Well, the areas you've identified are, you know, the visible areas, are the ones that are where the most trips are, the intersections and so forth like that. So you, in my opinion, you need to focus on those. And, yeah, whatever you can do to incentivize things inside those,
Okay,
you know, I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
because the other
I
option
mean,
is,
I wouldn't be in favor of incentivizing, you know, providing incentives to somebody else besides that.
right,
They're
so,
not, they're gonna wanna be near the intersection and closer to the
Yeah.
road and.
Mike,
up there, so.
and I'm along those same lines, the first step is you know, like, if you don't wanna do, if you just are like, you know what, we only wanna see this within the overlay zone, then you just say no to it elsewhere. And you say it's only allowed within that zone, but if you're okay with it elsewhere, but you just want it to look better within the overlay zone.
I think what I was hearing from the planning and zoning commission is that we want things to look nice, and we want to be flexible with our zoning district requirements.
Okay.
So that it helps them, it makes it easier for them to come in, so they're not so restrictive on certain things. But at the end of the day, we want something that's attractive and aesthetically pleasing and so forth. So, yeah, there's some incentives to be in there because there's flexibility.
I like that.
But then
flex-
I like the idea, I think I kind of hinted on this last time, there's a way that we could draft it up that those types of projects will be reviewed by the planning and zoning commission.
Would it be considered like a conditional use permit?
Almost like plan development.
Yeah,
Almost, you know,
yeah,
I
like,
mean, we haven't done plan developments here, but they typically, well, that's tied to the zoning change, but this would be tied to the overlay itself. There'd be a requirement in there that the planning and zoning commission, you guys would act more like an aesthetics board,
review.
a review board for anything that goes in there. And the buck would pretty much stop with you guys, and not go to the supervisors, you know, it's something that.
Yeah, I would say within those areas you require a site plan.
Oh, yeah, I mean, we would require that site plan, but we take a step forward.
You want another, like,
Further, we require architecturals or something like that.
so on your current site plans, elevations and that kind of thing are not, okay.
Not that, well, yeah.
I will dig into it, but yes, exactly those types of things that you get into this aesthetics review board, whatever we want to call it, so that it's not a,
So that we're getting consistent, you know, we have somebody come in and then, you know, the person next to them, hey, what, you know, not that we're looking for an identical match in aesthetics, but we're looking for something complementary, it's like, yeah, someone's not gonna drag down the value of something else, or someone's not gonna.
This continuity in the.
Well, and that-
The buildings, yeah, you don't see something small or something, you know.
Right.
and that you're fair to applicants over time, you know, if somebody comes in now and asks for something that the same, you know, somebody else who comes in 2 years from now goes through that same process and is under the same kind of review requirements.
But yeah, as I said last time, I feel this board should be doing more, you know, in terms of, you know, doing design review and. I don't know what you guys feel about that, I'm just putting it out there, but I mean. Yeah.
And you're talking about this just in what we would put for the overlay zones.
Yeah.
So if somebody wants to come into that overlay zone, they want to put a commercial business,
Mhm.
you're still gonna change, you're still gonna have to rezone to spot of commercial zoning. Is that correct, or would that circumvent that?
So they would not necessarily have to rezone, it'd be in the overlay, correct?
Yeah,
I mean, there's an underlying, we have an overlay zone, there's underlying zoning, and then there's a land use.
Yeah.
So it depends on how we craft that code, and you're based on your experience, would that trigger them to change the underlying zoning also to commercial?
Yeah.
Okay, so they, I mean, they change it to commercial, but there'd be, a requirement would be that they have to comply with the overlay zoning
So-
district requirements.
The overlay zones become a part of the future land use map, so think of this map with, I'm gonna roughly draw an overlay zone, right? Here's our rough overlay zone. And Sarah kind of mentioned before, and I didn't get a chance to put together the actual chart, but when, in the new comprehensive plan with this transportation corridor focus, there would be zones that would be allowed within that overlay zone that they would need to rezone to, because you want to make sure that they're, if it's commercial, you know, if it's a commercial type project, that it's not on an ag property and that's okay because it's in the overlay zone. We want them to go through that zoning process. It's just that the overlay zone will tell the review that, yes, that is a compatible use within these overlay zones to go through that process. And it's not spot zoning at that point, even if I'm running out of space here. Start highway again. And we have our overlay zone, right? And you have all ag, all of this is ag on either side of it, all over the place. Somebody wants to come in and do, let's do a change just to make it small. Somebody wants to come in and do a commercial property there, right? Now, I would tell them that you would encourage them to look at the bigger picture probably and see, and that's where that design process comes in, like, well, how are you gonna get connections back here and that kind of thing. But in general, if they only wanted to do this one piece into commercial, if it's in that overlay zone, it wouldn't be spot zoning because that is compatible use within the overlay zone and the future land use map supports that. As long as we have that in the language of the future land use map, you're not, I know what the spot zoning, nobody wants to do spot zoning, like, let's just do it out here in the middle of nowhere. We just have to have a future land use map that supports rezoning to that type of area, and eventually over time, it may fill in. But it's not spot zoning in that sense, because the main thing with spot zoning is when you make a decision that isn't based on a future land use map, that or isn't supported by it. So as long as we can show that the future land use map will support rezonings in those overlay zones, we're okay.
And of course, the map.
Oh, yes, of course. Sure.
And this is my concern. When you look at on this map where we have such a long distance here.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of distance here. We just had an issue down here in the Gallery area and spot zoning was talked about. So if you allow that entire area with your overlay zone, and somebody gets with this farmer and says, hey, can I buy an acre or two for here? I want to put something here. And can I buy an acre or two for here and put something here? Same up here. You have that same situation of leapfrogging around.
Yeah.
That's a big area if we were ever try to rezone and do a commercial. And I guess having that explanation makes me look at some of these areas where we've done really large areas, it makes me think, should we carve those down?
Sure.
Oh, they need to be struck down.
Because
Okay.
if that's gonna be, as the overlay goes, if we're going to change the zoning, I see a potential problem, I guess. I don't know.
No, that's a good point, because I'm thinking smaller, little
Mainly-
overlay.
yeah, mainly up here.
Those are some big overlay areas.
Where you've got the ag and that actually, I wouldn't want to discourage anybody from coming in there, but that's a long stretch to be leapfrogging. I just want a little business here and I just want a little business there.
Yeah,
That-
I mean,
that
we could
causes
identify, you're right, I mean, just the key area. Not that it always can be amended, the overlay can be extended, we get to start getting along
Yeah.
the road.
So you say, or you get a big
I mean, yeah, when you did this exercise, we realized that these were big.
Yeah.
We haven't even shrunk them down yet, or
No.
Okay.
start analyzing them.
Yeah.
Thoroughly, but.
But if that's part of the process, that you could allow a rezone, I don't want to end up with a bunch of, and it would be anything, it would be commercial, it could be industrial.
Yeah.
It
No,
could
maybe
be-
the parcel
what I
was the
wanted,
right
yeah.
size, the
Yeah.
galleries could be a little more of that size kind of thing.
I guess that's my
Some
concern.
of them may have a mix of commercial and industrial, some may just be strictly commercial like this, the rest might not be commercial.
Yeah.
You know, and,
So we can designate on that
this may
overlay.
all be just commercial, you know.
You know, you could, I like where Jeff was going with it, you shrink the overlay. If you get a big enough user that comes in and is like, well, this doesn't cover my whole area that I want to develop. Tell me, change the overlay, yep, we'll go ahead and expand that for you, like, don't say no.
It's that way flexible.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Where white transfer and storage is out there, they just can't. I mean, and then I was gonna, go that way, but I guess this area here might be kind of a concern too, so
Which one? Sorry, I missed it.
I'm just looking at,
Not the size.
yeah, maybe. Have you used those before and how has that worked out? How have the legal challenges?
I have used overlay zones before absolutely, and challenge wise, I haven't seen any challenges on, you know, is that allowed? I have not used them in this way in a rural area, and I like what you guys are, I like where we're going with this, and I think it's actually a really kind of innovative and very cool in that sense. And I think it'll work if we just, it's right sizing it, and then what is still, I think the bigger question is, what does that review process look like for stuff with that does want to develop within that overlay zone? So if Kevin was coming in all over again, and he wasn't leading the charge on trying to do something like this, and you guys already had this in place, what's the ideal way of saying, yep, that looks like a good spot for this, we love what you're doing with the building, we'd like to see this, and this change, we wanna make sure you're allowing for access to the other part of this property, like, what does that process look like to go through that? Is your current subdivision process adequate, or is there a little bit more that needs to be added within these overlay zones? That, I think, is that's where we're gonna get to. And then where can we be flexible? You know, but still.
I don't wanna have a design standard set. I'm thinking of if you've got a chain coming in, if you've got a Casey's or you've got a Quick Start, they have their set design standards for what they want. And you say, well, you know, that really isn't fitting what we wanna do, we wanna see something different, and they say, well, we're gonna.
Right.
But then again, the mom and pop that wants to come in and you're gonna say, well, you need to do these design standards, and they say, well, you didn't make a Quick Start. You know, I don't wanna have that kind of.
No, and I don't think so having friends who work for both, Come and Go and Casey's, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, they have a model that they use for 5 years in about every situation, they sort of move it around on the lot, and it basically tries to use quality materials and, you know, but it still has to have their branding and all that kind of stuff. I wouldn't get into the weeds on that stuff, but I would say quality materials, you know, or that a certain percentage on the front of it has glass. And I can certainly run some, like whatever we come up with, I'll run past those guys and just say, hey, you know, is this something you're seeing normally? No, but quality materials and a certain, like, you don't wanna have it look like, think of like a gentleman's club, or old supper clubs. What was the deal with old supper clubs not having any windows? I don't get it.
Nobody's seen in there.
I guess not, we used to go to this one in Belmont all the time, Catalan's, it was like north of town, you know?
Yeah.
And the only thing I remember as a little kid is it had this little tiny window, and that was the only windows were like portholes.
Yeah.
It was different than any other restaurant I went to, so, but yeah, I would say like,
So there's a few other things we can get in there, right?
sorry,
Aesthetics wise, there's landscaping,
Yep.
signage, just
Yeah.
some things like that. I mean, you can get into the architecture a little bit with materials, maybe something that requires some articulation a little bit, instead of something coming in boxy.
Yeah.
So to speak, and then without, you know, like you said, just making sure that we're gonna get somewhat of a decent product, and you can be flexible, you know, and then your material, maybe the materials, regulating the materials a little bit.
yeah,
And Walmart tried to go in down at George Creek. Do you remember that issue?
I mean, yeah, they made build it's a brick Walmart.
It was a big deal, it was huge, and it was all over the aesthetics.
Yeah.
And Walmart's a big company, you know, and I think they ended up, I don't wanna say they lost, but I think they came to an agreement and, you know, wanted it to look good. And, you know, like Heather said, I don't wanna say no to anybody, I wanna discourage anybody.
Right.
But at the same time, yeah, trying to keep the uniformity of the look. And I'm just looking, like I said, this is such a big area there, hopefully we can.
There's a fine line, we were in Old Line, and I saw a Dollar General that has a total front, the whole facade is brick, and the sides are split concrete block.
Wow.
And so that's another one of those ones that I'm like, I wanna meet the architect for Dollar General and be like, dude, I wanna know if the guy has any vision at or if he's just like, I need a box with fluorescent lights, that's all, and shelves, like, that's what I'm doing.
Nice looking work.
if we,
I
right,
was just gonna say, a lot of them look like a village of Fort stuff.
we wanna provide guidelines for them to get to a good quality structure without saying no. We don't wanna create something that is in the business of saying, no, we wanna get to yes. The whole idea here with the overlay zones, as I get it, is we know these are growth corridors. We don't anticipate that the cities are gonna be facilitating this growth. We've seen requests for additional growth within the county along these areas. How do we get quality growth here, and what can we do to help facilitate
That's
that?
not only landscapes, the landscape buffers, stuff like that, as you start seeing more green and how it's laid out, consistent buffers so that.
But yeah, if we write it, right back to your question about the spot zoning, if we write it within the future land use plan and you can make those decisions, even if it's parcel by parcel, and we want to avoid that leapfrog stuff, but obviously, one parcel is gonna go before another sometimes in any situation. As long as it's done in conjunction with the future land use map, you're pretty good on the spot zoning side. Yep.
And that's, I guess that's what I see as a, could be a potential issue.
Sure.
You talked about rezoning some of those areas.
And do you ever see where anybody wants to rezone it into?
I could see potentially, the problem with residential outside of single family in an area like that is that's a lot of money. Somebody who owns that property is gonna charge a lot of money for it. And an industrial or commercial development can cover that cash flow analysis, but a single family home can't. Now, you might be able to do some more dense industrial, but how are you gonna provide utilities to it? That's when that equation flips a little bit in a rural area. If it's next to a city or in a city, yeah, great, they just, run another sewer pipe and get some water out here where we gotta have a sprinkled building that, we're gonna have 12 apartments or whatever it is, but if you're in the county, water may not be an issue, you may be able to get that from Xenia, but where do you get a septic? You're looking at community septic at that point, not just a lateral field or a mound system type thing. So the needs of higher density residential in a rural area kind of sort of.
Unless you're in like some of those, where we have some of those water ones, because a lot of times you're gonna get people who want to go into the rural, as residential, control on the highway.
Mhm.
And they're not on gravel.
Right, yeah, then they don't have to.
Yeah.
And
If those long ones,
So
up on Highway 7 and along Gallery and on east side, or that,
the other thing that's been rattling in my brain is if there's a minimum development
yeah, because I know.
size for the overlay, like a minimum that you go to, and it's not, it would be more conducive to commercial and residential, or somebody having to do like a planned unit development or a commercial subdivision. If you're gonna bite this off doing something here, yeah, you maybe only wanna do this one piece right now, but we're gonna have you kind of at least preliminary look at how a bigger area would work, and maybe there is a minimum development size.
Which, for acreage, if you're gonna take that out of agricultural, it's a minimum acreage size too, so.
What's the minimum lot size in the ag zone now for, like if I'm 2 acres?
Well, then, we have some other properties that are zoned residential as opposed to ag that are,
Small.
when the utilities are not available, but still you're gonna need a good acre and a quarter. Subject to that.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, you got some, I was thinking new stuff. You have some existing stuff that, yeah, it's not.
we don't have plan unit development ordinance.
Okay.
And, there's stuff that would be, has its advantages, for clustering and stuff like that on the road. That's a whole different discussion.
Yeah.
If these guys want to get involved in PUDs. They're neat, we preserve certain features, we stuff and preserve the stuff.
Yep. Yeah, especially if you do like, if people are looking at doing conservation.
Along the river.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
well, right, where you allow them the density, you allow them to pull that density from an entire area and then keep the rest of it in an outlot, you know? Yeah. Okay,
I have a question for Jeff now. So let's say we get this overlay section done on those areas. Someone wants to come in, we still are doing our public hearing, we're still doing all those things. The public still has the opportunity to come in and voice their opinions.
I think you're right, you're exactly right, because you're thinking about the process.
Yeah,
And what is the trigger? The trigger, like you said, which I think makes sense now, is it requires it to get rezoned. So that's your public hearing. And what, we'll know that overlay zoning district, what zoning districts are compatible with that overlay, it's gonna be industrial or commercial or whatever it may be. But they're gonna be bound by those overlay district requirements when they come in and develop. So at that time, they'll be required to submit their site plan, other landscaping aesthetics and stuff like that, for you guys.
and with the public hearing, and I mainly look at that on, right around the gallery area. Public hearing, you have a massive public outcry against it. This is a legal challenge that, well, there was an overlay district, so we can do it.
I get back to every development proposal is unique. What's the reason for denial? I mean, is it because of utilities or is it because of, what's the reason? I mean, we'd have to come up with a valid reason for denial. Because if it comes in and meets all the requirements of that district, sometimes it's very difficult to deny it.
Yep.
I
You
mean,
would be more of a legal challenge to deny it in that sense than to, if it legally meets all the requirements and just because there's a public outcry against it, I guess,
see, like that Dollar General one, I believe, out there down the gallery, that was, you guys probably recommended denial on that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it should have been denied, but anyway. I mean, there's some valid reasons for that. There was no commercial around there, there was nothing. Here we're gonna have overlay zones that are, here we're gonna have overlay zones, what's that?
and then,
Well, here we're gonna have an overlay zone that's gonna say, hey, you can do commercial industrial right here. You're gonna meet all these requirements, there's a specific standard. Yeah, I mean, it could be denied. I'm not saying a petition could be denied, but it'd be much more difficult than if they're gonna come in and demonstrate they comply with everything.
but you're right, that particular one sounds like if the future land use map,
That was more spot
what
zoning.
does it have as transitional agriculture, so wherever they were proposing for that
Yeah.
land, that rezoning didn't meet what was transitional agriculture was designed for, then there could be a challenge in spot zoning, sure.
Yeah. It's quite a song. I guess I look at the overlay thing kind of like a way of rezoning without rezoning. Or a way of rezoning without saying, yes, it's gonna be that. I guess I'm just curious as to what kind of a legal challenge could come from that.
The other option is you could, underneath those zones, you could have a actual future land use classification that specifically designated what zones you could use and use the overlay zone to help guide the additional level of review on the aesthetics side
Well,
of
if I
things.
take back, you lost me, so you had.
I'm losing myself, sorry.
I think you meant zoning.
No, I'll show you exactly.
Because
what
you
I-
have the zone,
It's also classified. Could be.
yeah,
So,
That's what I would-
within, okay,
let's just do an example. right?
yes, why not? Like, I like to draw, why not? Gotta find a marker that works. Okay, so we have this property that is along a road, it happens to be in our overlay zone, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we just had the overlay zone, we'd have, so this is the overlay. Put that out there. Now we have the future land use map. The future land use map could have ag. That would be one way to do it. right? So that's all ag, and we kind of allow and make this process, well, within the future overlay zone, you could do, you know, this type of, commercial development. And here's the requirements we're gonna use. The other option would be number one, future land use. Number two is that within that same area of the overlay, you do a, for lack of a better term, let's call it flex. So within the flex zone, and I'm gonna try and draw this chart the right way. So I have my flex zone and I have these zoning classifications, right? I got residential, ag, commercial, industrial. Okay, so within the flex zone, I want to discourage residential. Now, if it's existing residential, there isn't anything we're gonna do about it, but for somebody to come in and develop residential within that, not what we're looking for, because we're looking for, this is a high transportation corridor, it's in our overlay zone. So we're not gonna encourage residential. We're not necessarily going to encourage agricultural, but it's compatible. That's a compatible zoning. These are zoning districts up here. This is your future land use classification. The other compatible districts would be industrial and commercial. So when somebody comes in to do this, not only do they look at this overlay zone that's gonna have some of those design aesthetics, but the future land use map underneath that shows that future land use designation as flex, which then they would go to this matrix and say, okay, in the flex zone, it looks like my options for rezoning are what's currently zoned ag, so I'm not gonna rezone to ag, but I could rezone to commercial or industrial, and I wanna do a warehouse facility. And so that would be industrial, so I need to go through the rezoning process within this flex zone to basically rezone it to industrial, which triggers your public hearing. But I'm also in this overlay zone, so I'm gonna have to talk with the planning and zoning commission about the aesthetics and my buffer and how I'm impacting the neighbors and, you know, what it looks like from the roadway and that kind of thing. That is an option above just keeping it ag. So basically, under these overlay zones, which kind of trigger that design level piece, you have a future land use designation that very clearly lays out which zoning classifications are compatible to rezone to.
So we're tailoring what those overlay areas could be rezoned to.
Yeah.
And is that legal to do?
Yes. Yeah, you have that now, right? So,
Well, yes, no. If somebody wanted to rezone to whatever, they would just have to go through the application process and try to rezone. But what you're saying, that would be, which is good, because especially when I look at the area along Highway 7, you think about what he's just saying there, is that you really probably wouldn't want to encourage residential there because of the truck traffic and everything, but you would be okay with the other ones. But right now, the way it is, if somebody wanted to try to do it, they can come in and make the application. And we don't really have a way of saying, without the overlay, that we would be able to say, you know, we're kind of, that's not really a good place for residential.
so when you currently go through a rezoning, you're using this future land use map or some, whatever the most current version of this is. And somebody comes in and says, I want to do a Dollar General outside a gallery down here. And you look at this and you say, okay, transitional agriculture, that's, sorry?
Yeah, this is zoning.
That,
Well, it's the land use too.
right, that is the future, what is the zoning? Is the zoning transitional, was transitional ag, what do they have to rezone to?
The latest petition that came in down the gallery at 175 and 4th Street there, northeast corner, zone A2.
Okay. So will they will they look to?
They have to go to, they have to be rezoned to commercial.
That's, okay, and that's what I'm saying, so right now, that's not, and I'm taking a really not in-depth look, haven't followed this case at all, but like, if you basically told me that now, I'd be like, I don't know if that's supported by the future land use map right now. I think they should have to ask for a land use amendment to this map as well as a zoning map, because otherwise that decision won't necessarily follow this. Now, because it's in that transitional ag, I have to read that description within the future land use map, and maybe it says like, commercial development that would be, related to urban. And then, okay, that's unarguable that you could go commercial within that area. I'm saying when we add a future land use matrix, a compatibility, we call it a compatibility matrix, it very clearly says, you have a couple ag zones, right? Ag 2, ag 1, it will clearly say, here is the future land use designation, agricultural preservation. Here are the compatible zoning districts, A1. That's the compatible zoning district. If it's not, if they're asking for something aside from A1, it isn't compatible. Now, they could change the future land use map, but then that's another process other than just a rezoning. I find we put these into more and more plans now because they are so useful for that specific process of, here's my future land use map, here's my zoning ordinance. What does this future land use classification what is the best compatibility in our zoning perspective? What should be allowed for rezoning and what should not without the future land use amendment?
And that's why I'm asking, because by doing this, that's an essential what we're doing, because we're amending that future land use map to allow those kinds of things.
So,
And I think particularly, again, going back to the Highway 7 thing, in our overlay zone, someone decides they want to put a condo, subdivision, whatever, and they say, well, it's gonna house all the people that work in the ag industrial, in the ag park.
Mhm.
I don't know if that would be a good thing or a bad thing. But by having some sort of that overlay and having that allowed in the overlay section, I mean, right now we would look at it and we would say, well, no, it's ag. But they make the argument that, well, it's going to house all the workers that are working at a plant or what have you. And again, I'm not thinking about it in the
No.
right now context, I'm looking at it in 20 years from now context.
There's a part of me that says in any of these, you guys should not be allowing any type of higher density residential in the rural area, push that to the cities. That is my advice as a planner. Now, rural residential subdivisions where you have 2-acre lots, there may be some very specific areas of the county that you would be okay with that. It's probably not those growth corridors, because those should be reserved for industrial, commercial, and ag industrial growth.
Yeah.
So I would say, when we write this up, we should identify some of those areas where we're okay with some of that, I don't wanna say higher density residential, but 2-acre rural subdivisions where people, are like, well, I'd love to live along the river down south of Fort
well, I
Dodge.
think our zoning map kind of already dictates that in the
It does, because that transitional ag is what that kind of allows.
But yeah, these overlay districts that we've identified are basically commercial and industrial districts. It goes right down too, but I mean, anything can be amended for some odd reason if they feel the need to put housing around there, we just amend it and it makes sense. I mean,
So I think we tie those two together, and the reason we wanna have both is because that flex space allows people to do commercial, industrial. Think of your zoning classifications, like they're very specific about what uses are commercial, what uses are industrial. And in those areas, as long as it looks good and the traffic works well, you guys probably are not real particular about whether it's commercial or industrial. Like if somebody wants to build a warehouse north of Kevin's truck stop, great, right? Let's make sure it looks good and that it doesn't cause, harm to the roadway and that the traffic isn't a problem, that kind of thing. But in general, that's, if if it looks good, great. We can keep some flexibility within that for people to rezone to either commercial or industrial, depending on what works best for them. But you still have that overlay to help make sure that, that things in that area go through an extra review process where if you were to do the same thing up here, nobody, like, yeah, it might work well out there, maybe it's an ag industrial use, right? It's an industrial use that is needed by the surrounding farming community, it's not a big, whatever the issue is. You guys aren't gonna subject it to the same overlay that you would. Now, it's still gonna fall into a land use classification matrix of, yep, that's an ag use, yeah, it's outside of Badger, it'll work there, but we don't need it to have buffering and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's not like it was on one of our major corridors. I think that's why you would keep the two and not just dump all the stuff you want to do extra in those overlay zones into a future land use category, which is, you and I talked about that a while back, and we said, here's why we're leaning towards overlay zones, is we want to do this extra level of aesthetics and design and review.
I just don't want it to, everything that you just said right there, it just reminds me so much of the clump plan. It's the clump map all over the place, it's that big, all,
And they have
yeah.
It's in these areas though.
yeah, but that was prioritization based on somebody else's idea about how things would develop and not necessarily the kind of how they would. Now, the overlay zones, I guess you get a little bit of that, but somebody could always ask for an amendment. So if they're next to the flex zone and they're like, man, I'd really like to develop this as well, you can expand the flex zone where I'll have to dig into the clump a little bit more, but I'm not a big fan of it.
Would you consider, with the different areas in the county, where some of them are close to the city of Fort Dodge and some of them are further out, would you, flex zone number 1, flex zone number 2, and have different requirements in the different ones?
I think that gets too convoluted.
Okay,
Could have multiple layers to your overlays, so that there's, like, you could have 2 to 3 options, and then say,
Want to keep it somewhat simple.
Simple,
Yeah.
yeah. Because some of them purely just allow for just commercial uses in my mind, and you don't want industrial uses. Maybe this hardcore in one area here, I'm just, we don't want any industrial.
that's what I'm
So,
looking at.
Yeah, and that should all be maybe commercial uses, not.
In that case, I would say we put it in the future land use map as commercial right now. Instead of,
It is.
instead
A
of,
lot of these.
okay, instead of a flex zone underneath it, you just put commercial. You can have multiple overlays.
Yeah.
But it might get
I think we
confusing.
just need to break each one down and say how we want to handle each
Yeah.
one, because how many do we got in, like 7, 8, 9? I mean, I don't know, not
Yeah, it's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-ish.
well, if you wanted to have justification for it, you could separate, have 2 overlay zones based on proximity to the municipality. And that way, those that are closer
Proximity to what?
to the municipality,
Municipality, well, something to be said about that too.
I got a lot of mapping to do, let me tell you that.
Well, that's just it, I mean, I'm looking at a lot of green blocks there, and like you're saying, you wouldn't encourage residential in the one on Highway 7, but the ones that are close to the city of Fort Dodge, yeah, could encourage residential there, so I don't see where one overlay is gonna catch all.
Right, that's,
No, it's not.
So, yeah, I'd like to see something written up.
okay,
I'd like to see, some sort of, something written up with the language in it. and-
something you can throw darts at.
No, I'm not gonna say that, but
That is my term, and I think it's great, because we've talked a bunch, and I have a general idea of where to start and give you guys something to throw darts at, and be like, I like that, I don't like that, let's keep that, let's change this, like,
do you think that 2 overlay zones based on the proximity to municipalities would resolve the issues that you're thinking of? Or not even resolve issues, but provide the appropriate uses.
Right? Two,
I'm thinking,
I don't know, I mean, I don't know, you really have to look at some of these. I personally think this is too big, this one here. I mean, these needs to be cut down maybe, and, some of these other ones. I don't know if it'll be appropriate size or whatever, but,
sure,
it's just, and then it's not only, then we gotta analyze the depth of them, how far we're gonna go back. And,
yeah, because we did a quarter mile on each side. I think.
I still think a quarter mile is pretty, this is quite a ways too.
Yeah.
So, we,
But see, now, like, I'm thinking like that one there in Gallery, see, you've got the elevator that's not too far south, or too far east. That, you can kind of start to tie in, well, it's right there at the junction of 144.
Yep.
So, tying in with commercial and industrial, going all the way from Gallery over to 144, that's not that far out of line, I guess I'm thinking, so.
Okay,
so you're gonna take your typical 40 here, right? What's a 40? How many feet back? What's the depth of that?
I know,
I mean, no, I'm thinking maybe 1,000 feet.
that's a good, well,
I mean, 1,000 feet is like a fifth of a mile, maybe
1,300 on one side, that's a quarter
maybe
mile.
500 feet. And the depth of them, I mean, that's,
It's not,
what the depth of those overlays have to be.
Yeah, because you've got that other, just east of Gallery on Gallery Avenue. That other, it's right there, there's a road right there, and that can make square, trying to, so I mean, I don't know.
Just analyze it all.
Yeah.
But you're right, this area here down the road, and then it's all, so just some big users up here
Right.
that are gonna require a lot, a lot of depth.
Expansion for them.
So,
your overlay zone, in what you're talking about for an overlay zone, how does that correspond to what we're requiring right now for industrial lots? I mean, not necessarily commercial lots, but for industrial lots. I mean, I wouldn't want to make our overlay zone that we're gonna allow industrial in smaller than what we currently have an industrial lot size.
no, that's why I think we want a lot of flexibility, and really think of this as a confusing me, when I really a plan development district, where it's, we're not really too much worried about setbacks, we're more worried about design, and how everything lays out, the aesthetics, Though we do have some uniformity, but in certain ways, but.
I will work up a map based on what we talked about. I might have to come up with a couple options and definitely do that future land use matrix and show you like, okay, process wise, if you go with this map here as it is, this is how it would go through the process of, if somebody wants to develop here or here or here, this is how that works out. And we can talk about it at the next meeting.
Right.
Because it'll be a good discussion. It was a great discussion tonight. Sorry about all my scribbles, but.
No, it's like planning and zoning 101. I'm trying to think of potential.
Yep.
Potential issues or potential, and, thinking about past issues that we've had, and, I just hate to give any sort of a legal challenge to anything. But at the same time, like Tyler said, I just keep going back to that, we want to encourage, we want to encourage development, we want to encourage this kind of stuff. I want to have so many rules in place that, but.
No, but I'm thinking exactly like you, is like, the petition comes in, how is it processed?
Yeah,
So that, we have to do a land use change, and we've got the zoning change, we want to go through a public hearing. I mean, you can write it all up, the fact that, okay, it's in this overlay, you just comply with this, it's a permitted use. And it doesn't have to, go through you guys or the board of supervisors, we can, you can do it that way too. But then again, you have to be really comfortable with your design standards and everything like that,
yeah. And I'm going back again, to what the supervisors asked us to do, which was the transportation corridor study, and trying to look at these from that perspective. These are our areas that we want to development, we want to encourage development in our transportation corridors.
Yeah, it's good, yeah, it's good.
Any more discussion on this?
Good.
Anyone else? Good discussion, yeah, very good discussion. All right,
Even
Thank you.
though,
thank you. Jeff, do you have anything else for us today?
yes, I do. One last thing,
One last thing.
we have a certificate of appreciation we want to give to Berna this evening for 8 years of service. And wish her luck. Yeah, you're welcome.
Awesome.
See, Tyler, we need 8 years from her. At least 8 years, you know what I mean? I think Gary, I don't know, what do you got, Gary, you're probably up there too. Not that way.
Are you on your second term? 5 years.
5 years probably, yeah.
I kind of zoning administrator. No, Britta, yeah, I fought for you back a couple years ago to make sure that you stayed on this board, was because of your experience of working with the city gallery and everything, and it's been so helpful. You bring up points that I would have never thought of, so we definitely appreciate your service here, and wish you luck.
That's a good perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love a lot, and it's been quite interesting, especially in my first few years. My first few years, I thought, what in the world did I get myself into? I did. Might even actually look at doing something in Missouri.
Your experience, I'm sure that anyone has to have on board.
Are you
So,
living in the city or are you in a rural area?
No, we're actually within the city limits.
Okay, the city.
You wouldn't know it, it takes us 7 minutes to get into town, but as
Okay.
the crow flies, we're 3 miles
well, if that's all you have, Jeff,
That's all we have.
that's what I have. All right, do I have a motion for adjournment?
All
All right.
right.
And do I have a second?
We will have a meeting, next month. We're gonna be bringing the windmill ordinance back to you. I've talked to some of you about this. We struck ours farm down there 10 years ago. A lot of communities or counties have adopted the model ordinance, kind of like what they did with solar. Well, what I've been finding out is a lot of them, this is brought the attention before, they want us to go back and take a look at this. A lot of the other cities or communities have now adopted more stricter or stringent setbacks. So basically,